Well, a heavy wool coat, brown as the Missouri mud, smelled of horses and wood smoke. It was the only thing of value Thomas Gallagher owned when he stepped off the steamboat in St. Joseph. The year was 1849. 22 years old, his hands were raw from the rope burns of the voyage. His stomach was hollow from the hardtack biscuits he'd shared with a man who died of fever 3 days out of New Orleans. Thomas was an Irishman. Oh, no, sir. Not from the old country, not really. His father had died in a ditch in County Cork. His mother had put him on a ship to America when he was 12. Go, she had said. Her eyes to eyes rose. There is no food here for a man who is still growing. He had grown. He grew in the alleys of New York. He grew in the stinking holds of canal boats. He grew in the lumber camps of Pennsylvania. And now he stood in St. Joseph, Missouri, at the edge of the known world. The air was different here. Dry, dusty. It tasted of promise and danger. Thomas was not a dreamer. He was a survivor, and survival told him that a man with nothing had to go where the land was free, or at least where the fight for it was still possible. He met her on a Tuesday. Her name was Eleanor. She wasn't a beauty in the way the songs tell it. Her hair was the color of dry wheat. Her face was sharp, worn by a hard life on a failing farm. Her eyes were the color of the sky just after a storm. Blue and clear and holding a quiet storm of their own. She was working at a boarding house, a place called the Widow Hartley's. Thomas had traded a day's labor splitting wood for a meal and a spot on the floor. He was sitting on the back porch mending a strap on his satchel. His coat was draped over the railing. When she came out with a bucket of wash water, she stopped. She looked at the coat. That's a fine coat, she said. Her voice was low, a little rough. Thomas looked at it. It's warm, he said. That's all a man needs. She didn't smile. She just nodded. She set the bucket down and started scrubbing a shirt against a washboard. He watched her, the way her arms worked, the way she didn't waste a single movement. I'm heading west, he said, after a long silence. Oregon, maybe California. She paused her scrubbing. That's what they all say. Most come back, or they don't come back at all. I ain't coming back, he said. It wasn't bravado, it was a fact. He had nothing to come back to. She looked at him then. Really looked. She saw the calluses, the quiet in his eyes, the way he didn't fidget or try to fill the silence with lies. You need a good knife, she said, and a pouch for flint. You'll lose it otherwise. He almost smiled. You know about the trail. She wrung out the shirt. Word. My brother went last spring. He wrote 2 letters, then nothing. That was the West, a place where people vanished. Into the dust, into the rivers, into the silence of the mountains. He stayed 3 weeks. Of course, things got worse. He didn't mean to. He had planned to be on the first wagon train heading for the Platte River. But there was a delay. A man selling oxen was asking too much. A guide had gotten drunk and broken his leg. The trail wasn't ready to receive him yet. Of course, a short ride. And there was Eleanor. He helped her with the heavy work. He fixed the fence around the chicken coop. He patched the leak in the roof of the boarding house kitchen. Of course, he would carve small things from scraps of wood. A bird, a horse. She would darn socks or shell peas. They didn't talk much. Words were expensive to people like them. But when they did, it was honest. Worse, a man who had come to Missouri with land grants and big dreams. He had died of a fever when she was 16. Brian. The farm was lost to a bank. She worked at the boarding house for a bed and a little coin. There's nothing for me here, she said one evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red, just more of the same until I'm old and my hands give out. He stopped carving. He looked at her profile, the sharp line of her jaw. Come with me, he said. The words fell out of him, for he hadn't planned them. A man with nothing doesn't ask a woman to share his nothing. She turned. Her eyes were wide, not with surprise, he thought, but with the terror of hope. To Oregon, she whispered. Yes, it's dangerous. Wars, I know. I don't have a wagon. I don't have supplies. I'll build the wagon. I'll get the supplies. She looked down at her hands. They were red and cracked from the lye soap in the water. Why? She asked. Or the carving down. A small horse. He slid it across the porch toward her. Because a man can survive alone, he said, his voice low. But he can't live alone. Not really. I've been surviving for 10 years. I'm tired of it. She picked up the wooden horse. She held it in her palm. If we go, she said, her voice trembling, we go together. We don't look back, no matter what. No matter what, he agreed. Of course, things got worse. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who smelled of whiskey and saddle leather. There was no ring, no white dress, just a promise made in the dust. He built the wagon, a small one, farm wagon, not one of the grand Conestogas. It was sturdy. He covered it with a canvas he'd traded for his good knife. He bought a yoke of oxen from a man who was too old to make the journey himself. Where they left, he gave her his coat. The brown wool coat. It's cold on the plains at night, he said, wrapping it around her shoulders. It swallowed her. She was so small inside it. You'll freeze, she said. I'll walk faster, he said. She buried her face in the collar. It smelled like him. Wood smoke and hard work. They left at dawn. St. Joseph was just waking up. The smell of bread and coffee followed them for a mile. Verses got ride, then it was gone, replaced by the smell of dust and the lowing of cattle. The first weeks were hard, but it was a clean, hard kind that builds muscle and purpose. Thomas walked beside the oxen. Eleanor walked beside him. She wore the coat when the wind came off the prairie. She learned to start a fire with damp wood. She learned to shoot the old musket he'd bought for a handful of bullets. Ride. That night, they would lie under the wagon, wrapped in a single blanket. They would talk about the farm they would build, a cabin in a valley, a plot for corn, a few head of cattle. We'll have a window, she said one night, looking at the stars, real glass window, so I can see the mountains when I wake up. You'll have 2 windows, he said, one for the mountains, one for the morning sun. She smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile. It was like the sun coming out, warmed him to his bones. They made it to Fort Kearny, then to the forks of the Platte. The landscape changed. The green gave way to brown. The brown gave way to a vast empty sea of grass that went on forever. Wind never stopped. It sang a low, mournful song. They met other travelers, families, men chasing gold. A few like them just looking for a piece of ground to call their own, while one family, the Haskins, traveled with them for a while. A father, a mother, and 3 small children. The father, a man named Silas, was talkative, nervous, worse. He had spent all his money on a grand wagon and fine oxen. We'll make it, Silas would say, wiping sweat from his brow. The Lord will provide. Thomas said nothing. He just kept walking. One afternoon, they reached the banks of the North Platte. The water was wide and brown. The crossing was treacherous. They had to wait for a guide to show them a sandbar. The storm came. Not a rainstorm. Whirring, a screaming beast of air and dust that turned the world to darkness. Thomas tied the oxen to the wagon. He pulled Eleanor inside the canvas cover. They huddled together as the wind tried to tear the world apart. When it passed, the Haskins wagon was gone. Silas was standing by the riverbank, staring at the muddy water. His wife was on her knees, her face in her hands. The children were crying. The wagon had been swept into the river, all their supplies, their food, their tools, everything. Thomas walked over. He looked at Silas. There were no words. We have nothing, Silas whispered. Nothing. Thomas looked back at his own wagon, his small store of flour, his salted pork, his seed corn. He gave them half. Eleanor watched him do it. She didn't say a word. When he came back, she put her hand on his arm. We'll make do, she said. It wasn't a question. We'll make do, he agreed. They went on. The Haskins turned back. The days grew longer. The food grew short. They ate less. They walked more. Force. Eleanor's face grew thin. Thomas's boots wore through to the soles. They reached the mountains, the Rockies. They rose up out of the earth like the spine of the world, blue and gray and capped with snow that never melted. Rail climbed. The oxen strained. The wagon creaked and groaned. One morning, Thomas woke to find Eleanor shivering, not from the cold, from a fever. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were too bright. Worse. It's nothing, stumbled. He caught her. It's nothing, she said. Just a chill. But it wasn't nothing. He'd seen fever before. On the ship. In the lumber camps. It took the strong and the weak alike. He made her lie in the wagon. Worse. He covered at her with his coat. He walked beside the oxen, leading them up the mountain passes, looking back every few minutes to see if she was still breathing. For 3 days she burned. He gave her water. Horse with a rag. He didn't sleep. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. He was kneeling beside the wagon, his face gray with exhaustion, his hands shaking. "Poor all," she whispered. He let out a breath, a laugh, a sob. He put his head on her chest and listened to her heartbeat. Strong, steady. They had to rest. They lost 3 days. The wagon train they had been following was gone. Of course, the Continental Divide. The air was thin. The nights were cold enough to freeze the water in the bucket. Thomas's boots fell apart. He wrapped his feet in strips of canvas. While Eleanor sewed him new moccasins from a piece of hide they'd been saving for a new harness. They came down out of the mountains into a valley. A green valley. A river ran through it, clear and cold. The grass was high. "This is it," Thomas said. "Horrors." He stopped the oxen. He looked at the valley. It was not Oregon. It was not the promised land of rich soil and mild winters. It was a valley in the shadow of a peak they would later call Ironwood Mountain. It was remote, was wild, but it was theirs. They built a cabin, a small one room, a dirt floor, a fireplace of stone. Eleanor had her window. It wasn't glass. It was a square cut in the log wall, covered with oiled paper. In the morning, the light came through it, soft and yellow. She could see the mountain. They planted corn. It grew. Not well, but it grew. They trapped rabbits. They fished in the river. For 2 years, they lived. It was a hard life, but it was a life they had built together. Thomas would sit on the porch he'd built, a few rough planks, and carve. Eleanor would sit beside him. She would read from a book she'd carried all the way from St. Joseph, a Bible. The pages were soft and smudged. She would read aloud, stories of Ruth and Naomi, of Abraham and Sarah. "Whither thou goest, I will go," she would read. Then she would look at him. He would nod. He didn't need the words. He knew. Then came the winter. The winter of 51. It started early. Snow in October. It didn't stop. Piled up against the cabin. It buried the wood pile. It buried the corn crib. They had food, but not enough. They had wood, but not enough to last until spring. Thomas hunted. Wet. He'd go out into the white silence, his musket over his shoulder looking for deer tracks. The game had gone deep into the forest. He would come back empty-handed, his beard frozen, his hands blue. Eleanor rationed cornmeal a day, a piece of dried rabbit size of her thumb. They lost weight. They grew weak. In December, Thomas knew they wouldn't make it. He sat by the fire. One night, Eleanor was asleep, wrapped in his coat. Her face was peaceful. The firelight danced on her sharp cheekbones. He made a decision. There was a settlement, a trading post, 40 miles south, 40 miles through snow that was up to a man's waist. Or he could make it. Maybe. A younger man. A stronger man. He wasn't sure he was either anymore. But Eleanor could not. She would die here if he didn't bring back food. He wrote a note. He couldn't read or write well, but he could form the letters. Where scratched them on a piece of birch bark with a piece of charcoal. Gone for food. Stay. Keep fire. I will come back. He put the note where she would see it, on the window ledge. He looked at her one last time. Coat was pulled up to her chin. Her breath was a soft cloud in the cold air. He put on the moccasins she had made him. He took the musket. He took a small pea, cornmeal for himself. He opened the door. The cold hit him like a fist. He walked. He walked through the snow. The wind cut through his shirt. His legs burned. His lungs burned. He thought of her. The way she smiled that first time. The way she held the wooden horse in her palm. The way she said, "We go together, no matter what." He walked. He fell. He got up. He walked. He walked through the night. The stars were sharp and cold. They watched him. By morning, he was lost. The snow had erased the landmarks. He knew the general direction. South, follow the river. But the river was frozen, covered in snow. He couldn't tell where it was. He walked until his legs gave out. He collapsed under a pine tree. He ate the cornmeal, a handful of dry, gritty dust. He thought about dying. It would be easy. Just to lie down, close his eyes, let the cold take him. But he saw her face, worked the sharp line of her jaw. The eyes the color of a storm sky. He got up. He walked for 2 more days. On the 3rd day, he found the trading post. A small cabin in a clearing. Smoke came from the chimney. He crawled the last 100 yards. A man found him, a trapper named Dutchy. He pulled Thomas inside. He gave him hot broth. He wrapped him in furs. Thomas was half dead. His feet were black with frostbite. His hands were cracked and bleeding. Force a short ride, but he didn't sleep. He grabbed Dutchie's arm. My wife, he gasped. 40 miles north. Valley below Ironwood. She's alone. She needs food. Medicine. Dutchie looked at him. He looked at his feet. He shook his head slowly. Son, he said, "Wars. Nobody can travel north in this. The snow is too deep. The passes are closed. She'll die," Thomas said. Dutchie was a hard man. He'd seen a lot of winters. He'd seen a lot of people die. "If I try to go," he said, "I'll die, Orson Scott, and she'll still be alone." Thomas lay there. He felt the warmth of the fire. He felt the pain in his feet. He felt the cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He couldn't go back. He knew it. His body was broken. He made Dutchie promise. When the snow melted, in the spring, he would go north. Force tell her. Tell her. What could he tell her? He wrote another note on a piece of paper Dutchie gave him. His hand shook. "Could not come back. Wait for me. I will send for you." He gave Dutchie his wife's name, Eleanor Gallagher. He gave him the directions, the valley below Ironwood Mountain. Then he closed his eyes. He didn't die. Not then. The frostbite took his toes on his left foot. 3 of them. Wires. Dutchie cut them off with a knife heated in the fire. The pain was beyond anything Thomas had ever known. He survived. He healed. But he could not walk far. Not anymore. He stayed at the trading post. He did what he could. Worked hides. He chopped wood. He counted the days. Winter broke. Late. The snow began to melt in April. Dutchie kept his promise. He packed a mule with food, with flour and sugar and salt, with a blanket and a bottle of medicine. Born right north. He waited. He waited. 1 day. 2 days. 5. On the 6th day, Dutchie came back. He was alone. Thomas was sitting on the porch of the trading post. He saw Dutchie ride into the clearing. His heart leaped. Then it fell. The mule was not carrying a second person. Dutchie dismounted. He didn't look at Thomas. He walked to the fire pit. He poured himself a cup of coffee. "Well," Thomas said. His voice was a croak. Dutchie took a long drink. He set the cup down. "I found the cabin," he said. He still didn't look at him. Thomas felt the world tilt. And she wasn't there. Thomas stood up. His bad foot throbbed. "Where would you go?" Dutchie finally looked at him. His eyes were old. Sad. "She didn't leave," he said. He reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a coat. The brown wool coat. It was folded neatly. The fire had been out in the cabin. The door had been left open a crack. The snow had drifted in. Or Thomas. "She was there," Dutchie said, "near the woodpile. The snow had covered her." Thomas took the coat. He held it. It was cold. It smelled of nothing. "She was holding this," Dutchie said. He pulled out a small piece of wood, a carving, a wooden horse. Thomas took it. He looked at it. His own handiwork. Given to her on a porch in St. Joseph. He looked at the coat. He looked at the wooden horse. Parties he had not been able to walk back. He remembered her face, the sharp line of her jaw, the eyes like a storm sky, the way she had said, "We go together. No matter what," right? Broken his promise. He had said, "I will send for you." But she had waited. She had waited through the long winter. She had kept the fire as long as she could. She had worn his coat to keep warm. And when the food ran out, when the wood ran out, she had gone outside to get more wood. Of course, things got worse. He had not made it back. He sat down on the porch. He held the coat in his lap. He held the wooden horse in his hand. He did not cry. Men like him didn't cry. Something broke inside him. Something that had been holding him together for 3 years, for 10 years, for his whole life. He had survived New York. He had survived the canal boats. He had survived the winter. She had not. And it was his fault. He had left her. He had made a promise he couldn't keep. He lived. He lived for 40 more years. He never remarried. He never went back to the valley below Ironwood Mountain. He couldn't. He became a trapper. Quiet man. Lived alone in a cabin near Dutchie's old post. People in the territory knew him. They knew he was a good man, a fair man. They also knew he had a coat. He wore it every day, even in summer. It was old. It was patched, or smoke and leather in time. And he had a small wooden horse. We kept it on the windowsill of his cabin. He would look at it sometimes, in the evenings, when the light was soft. Worse, he never told anyone the whole story. Not the trappers who came through. Worse, sit and ride, not the settlers who started to fill the valley. But sometimes, If you asked him why he never went back to the east, why he never sent for anyone, he would just look at the mountain, or he would touch the coat, and he would say, in a voice that was very quiet, very old, some promises you only get one chance to keep. He died in 1891. They found him in his cabin, sitting in his chair and looking out the window at the mountain. The coat was on his lap. The wooden horse was on the window ledge. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley. No one knew her name to put on the stone, so they just put his. But if you go there today, to that old cemetery, in the shadow of Ironwood Mountain, you will see a small wooden horse. Worse, it's weathered, it's cracked, and if you hold it in your hand, you might feel something. Not magic, not fantasy, just the weight of a promise made in the dust, a promise made in the dust, a promise broken by the snow, or bread, and a love that lasted even when the one who gave it could not.